Good evening and welcome back for a brand new episode of Military Brat University. As always, I'm excited to be here, but tonight I'm particularly excited because I have a dear friend that, we've got 35 plus years behind us. And I can't tell you how excited I am to not only reconnect, but also to have him share his journey with us. I'm going to add the title. That's not his personality, but I'm going to add the title. So everybody, please help me welcome Dr. Fermin Renteria.
Thank you, Jay. I am happy to be with you.
It's good to see you again, my friend.
That it is. It has been way too long. I think we've had one phone conversation maybe in those 35 or so years.
I believe so.
That's probably been 10 to 11 years ago.
Easily. So I tell you what, I really don't even know where to start, even though I've done all my research. I'm just so excited. But I tell you what, I'll start where our paths crossed, right? Which was in Savannah, Illinois, right around 1984, 85. Is that right?
I believe it was, yes, late 1984, very early 1985. I remember I left Alabama.
Yes.
Had a car ride up there. We arrived into Savannah late, dark, and some friends of my mom's family, because my grandfather had actually been stationed up there in Savannah. He was civil service. My mom was civil service. My grandfather was civil service as well, and he had been stationed in Savannah previously. And the Hagans, I just recalled their name, that owned the golf course out there. And so when my mother and I got to Savannah that night, we went out there. We stayed with them for the first few days that we were there. So I arrived in Savannah really sleepy, didn't pay a whole lot of attention getting from the car into the house. And I just remember waking up that next morning and looking out there across the golf course and seeing nothing but snow. And coming from Alabama, snow was such a rarity. And to see everything just coated in snow, not just the patchy little bits of snow here and there, that was just such a culture shock.
Yeah. So, I remember, and I would say within days if you get in there, because I was hypersensitive to the quote unquote new kid, right? So it was something I always paid attention to. And if I recall correctly, once you guys left the Hagans, you and your mom settled right in downtown, right across the street from the grocery store.
We lived right across the street from the grocery store. We had a little apartment there right above the hardware store. I forget the name of the hardware store. But we had that was actually a really neat place. You had to go upstairs, obviously, to get there. No elevator or anything to get up to that second floor apartment. But it had a good view. You couldn't really see much out the back side of it because of the storage room and everything for the hardware store. But as you were leaving, there was a window there kind of in the stairwell, and you could see out. And, Mississippi River was just a stone's throw from the back of the apartment. So it was really, that was a pretty neat place, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't know if I was going to bring it up, but you and I shared a hobby back then.
I know where you're going with this, my friend.
Yes. So I'm going to say,
it was not a very widespread hobby in Savannah.
Absolutely not. No, we were definitely unicorns in that regard. So two things. One, I want to give you a compliment, and two, I want to give you thanks. Here's a compliment. The compliment is within the realm of that hobby, which I got to do, pretty far and wide, large towns, large cities, small towns, and everything in between. The very best backspin I've ever seen with my two eyes, you did. Yeah, you had the very best one I've ever seen live. And that yeah. So there's that. Second thing, and it really speaks to who you've become as a person. And I might be going a little deep for my own good here, but you haven't become the teacher, professor that you have, right? And even within the profession that you have, which is a giving profession. You were even giving back then, because there was a song called Tour de France back then. There were two versions of it. There was a knockoff version, and then there was a version by Kraftwerk, which was the version. And you had that tape. And the moment I noticed you had that tape, before I could let the words leave my lips, you gave it to me, which was a big deal to me back then. So thank you for that all these years later. Okay.
Well, you are quite welcome. And thank you for the compliment. And one thing I've got to throw in there, apparently had a good backspin, never, ever managed to master the helicopter. Could not ever get it down.
Yeah, that was the toughest move. That was the A-class move of them all back then. So you didn't finish high school in Savannah, but you ended up in a town similarly sized, right down in Texas.
Yes.
Right, New Boston.
Yep, little New Boston, Texas. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Moved there from Savannah, and that is where I ended up doing the last couple of years of high school. Finished up high school there and graduated there.
Okay. Yeah, and so what was the step beyond that? What would you do next?
Well, initially when I graduated, I stayed in the Texarkana area. Stayed in New Boston. Went to Texarkana College for my first year of college, the local community college. And, honestly, thinking about it, looking back on it, I don't know that there are a lot of people that would necessarily believe where I'm at. There might be more than I would think, but just, I didn't take school that seriously, didn't necessarily have a lot of aspirations or that sort of thing. And so I stayed at the community college for a year. And actually my mother got transferred to Germany, probably about September or October of that first year that I was in college. And I had just started. I had a girlfriend there at that point in time. So, of course, I didn't want to leave. So she moved to Germany. I stayed there in New Boston, finished up that first year of college. After I finished that first year of college, my dad lives in Orlando. He's always been in Orlando. And I went down there, stayed with him for a little while, then flew over to Germany, stayed with my mother in Germany for a little bit, and was around a lot of the military people while I was there, and thought, hey, this looks like a great, really, really cool career. And so came back, stayed with my dad for a little while again, and enlisted after that.
Okay. So were you maybe 20 years old by the time you enlisted?
I was 19 when I enlisted. I went in the late entry program. And then by the time I did get to basic training, I had turned 20 at that point. Okay. So I was a little bit older than a lot of the other recruits, because most of them were about 18, 19. So I was a year or two older than a lot of the other guys I was at basic training with. Okay.
Did that help you out in any way?
Oh, the impact that decision had, I don't think can ever be measured. Because like I said, I wasn't taking school seriously, didn't necessarily have a lot of aspirations or anything like that. Now, when I joined the military, what did I do? Hey, I want to be airborne infantry. I want to be cool, jump out of airplanes, do all that high speed stuff. So that's what I did. So in terms of thinking about a military career, what kind of benefits you might have from that following your service, not necessarily a ton. But what it did do for me, number one, got me my college fund and my GI Bill, because I made sure I signed up for that. So I got my college money. But number two, it just was an opportunity to grow up, do some things, learn a little bit about the world. And when I did finish my enlistment after 4 years, was much more serious about school, had a little bit more clear career path in mind. And how I actually ended up in nursing is kind of funny, because one of my really good friends from high school in Texas, his mother was a nurse. And when I was in the military, actually the unit that I was with, we spent about 3 weeks a month out in the field, about 10 months out of the year. We had usually 2 months, 1 month in the summer, 1 month around Christmas time that we didn't do field time. But other than that, like I said, about 10 months out of the year, we spent most of the month out in the field. And we didn't have a ton of medical coverage at the unit that I was with. We didn't have a lot of medics and stuff for the number of people the amount of time and the amount of area that we covered when we were out there. So I had the opportunity to go to EMT school while I was in the Army. It was I think about a 3-week course that I was able to do. And I had thoughts of being something involved with medical field. And so I volunteered for it and was selected. So I did the EMT course, got my certification as an EMT. And initially, my plans had been when I got out of the Army was to go back to Texarkana. The little community college there has a paramedic program. And so I'd intended to go to paramedic school and be a paramedic. And I was home on leave one weekend in Texarkana. And again, my friend's mother, who is a nurse, we were sitting around the house talking, and she said, you know, Fermin, yeah, you could go do paramedic school. And she said, but when it's 109 degrees, because, you know, keeping in mind, this is East Texas. And so
Right.
you'll get days like that. So she said, when it's 109 degrees, when it's pouring down rain, when it's 27 degrees and it's sleeting and raining and snowing and all that stuff, she said, you know, you're going to be out there in that. She said, or you could go to nursing school. You could do emergency department, ICU, something like that, that's got that kind of adrenaline rush that you like to have. You've got an air conditioner, you've got a heater, and you've got a roof over your head. And for somebody that had spent, like I said, 10 months out of the year for the last 4 years out in the field, getting rained on, snowed on, being cold, being hot, that had a lot of appeal. And so that kind of cemented my move towards nursing from there.
Okay. All right. Now, as you know, you were actually in the same exact unit that my dad had spent some time in, you know, in the early part of his career, you know, the 101st, which is that's airborne air assault, right?
Actually, no, I was with the 1st Battalion 509th. I didn't actually end up spending any time with the 101st.
Okay. I'm incorrect there. Yeah, I misstudied on that one. Yeah, I guess I assumed.
That's all right.
Yeah, that you were in the same one that my dad had been in, but you guys were both airborne. I knew that for a fact. How many jumps did you?
Honestly, I can't tell you exactly how many, because my unit was to maintain jump status, you have to complete at least one jump, or at least at the time that I was in, you had to complete at least one jump every 3 months to maintain your jump status. And the record keeping, they generally made sure that they got those recorded that you needed to maintain jump status. But unofficial count, right around 51 range is kind of my unofficial count.
Okay. All right. Because I know, you know, I think back in my dad's day, they simply had more opportunity to jump. And then I think there may have been a financial element that drove him back then as well. Because his number was up there. It was 472 was his number.
Yeah.
You know?
That's impressive.
Yeah. It's impressive, but you know, the wear and tear on the knees, you know, is another thing altogether.
Yes, it is. It's that the airborne life is rough on knees and backs. It's very unforgiving.
So did you stay stateside your 4 years in, or did you ever deploy anywhere?
I actually did stay stateside. The first 2.5 years I was ended up in Little Rock, Arkansas, because I was with, as I said, the 1st Battalion, 509th Parachute Infantry, and we were actually OPFOR at the Joint Readiness Training Center. And we kind of split our time between our kind of home base was at the Little Rock Air Force Base, but then we would go over to Fort Chaffee, which is in the Fort Smith, Arkansas area over western Arkansas, to do our field rotations. And so I was there about the first 2.5 years. And then the entire training center, we moved down to the wonderful, wonderful place of Fort Polk, Louisiana for the last about 18 months that I was in.
Okay. Yeah.
And it, for anybody who hasn't had the pleasure of seeing Leesville, Louisiana / Fort Polk, Louisiana, you're missing an experience.
I tell you what, I want to cover that when we get back, because obviously I had a knowing laugh when you mentioned that post. But we'll be right back after these messages with more Military Brat University. And welcome back to Military Brat University. Tonight we are spending some time with Fermin Renteria, a lifelong friend of mine who has started out, we actually started out in the high school phase and went through high school, into college, into the Army. And just a moment ago, he was sharing with us that he spent the last 18 months in the Army in Fort Polk, Louisiana, which brought about an involuntary chuckle simply because that post is always mentioned as a place that you do not want to be, if for no other reason than the climate. It's the swampland. It's Louisiana. It's hot, and it's hot. So please share some more with us about your time there.
Oh man, that was an interesting place. You coming in. Of course, I moved down there from Little Rock, so you're driving in because had my own car at that point in time, and you're driving through Leesville, and it seems like you're seeing nothing more than bar, tattoo parlor, bar, tattoo parlor, going through town.
Right.
You get to learn the place, and it is better than your first impression of it. It wasn't all bad, but it's a different culture down there in Louisiana. Like you said, it was hot. It was kind of interesting because you were far enough south down there that you had sand, really more so than you had a lot of dirt and stuff. And so I'd spent some time in Florida growing up. So that was actually, reasonably familiar thing rather, to me down there. But yeah, it was an interesting place. It really was.
Okay. So you finish up the Army. Do you immediately begin the path of moving towards a nursing degree?
I did actually. At the time that I was in, they had a program where if you were accepted to college, if you were within either 60 or 90 days of your scheduled separation date, but you had an acceptance letter from college, then you could get an early release. And I did take advantage of that. I think I ended up getting out about 35 or so days early. So it really about a little over a month early, because I was accepted to school. So got out, moved back to Texarkana, which is just about 20 miles or so from where I had gone to high school, right there on the Texas-Arkansas border, and started my prerequisites pretty much immediately for nursing school right there at Texarkana.
Okay. And how far along did you get at Texarkana?
I guess about 3 semesters there at Texarkana, getting my prerequisites finished up, the anatomy and physiology, the science courses and things that you needed, because I had some of my basic courses, English and my math requirements and everything from the year in college before the military. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have a ton. And actually, one of the things that I had started to do a little bit while I was in the military was doing triathlons. Just had developed an interest in it, I think, from watching probably the Ironman on television. And of course, physical fitness was always something that was emphasized in the military. So I had started to do some triathlons, and the Texas high school swim team actually practiced at the Texarkana College pool. So I met some of the swimmers from Texas High and met the coach, and he knew I was doing triathlon. So he'd actually let me come swim with the swim team some. And from there, he knew that I was going to, I ended up going to nursing school at a school called Henderson State University, mm-hmm. a little Division II college in Central Arkansas. And he knew the swim coach up there. And so he got to talking to the swim coach, and I got an invite to come in as a walk-on with the swim team when I came up there. So I transferred up to Henderson and actually had made the decision at that point that I wanted to go and swim at college, and had the opportunity to do that. So I had decided, even if I didn't get accepted to nursing school, that I would find another major while I was to be able to go to Henderson so that I could do that. But did fortunately get admitted to the nursing program. So I made the move up about 90 miles up the road to Arkadelphia, Arkansas, to attend nursing school, my undergraduate program at Henderson State University. Swam 2 years while I was there, and then did 1 year that I didn't have any eligibility left to compete as a student assistant coach with the team. So had a really, really good time. That was great, both in terms of academics, and then had that outside stuff with the swim team. So I had a really, really great time. Met my wife there.
Okay.
My wife and I met while I was working on my undergraduate degree. And I tell everybody, fittingly enough, my wife and I met in abnormal psychology.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I want to take a couple minutes and talk about that gentleman that was the coach of the swim team. Because there's been some unfortunate news in the past couple of months regarding him.
Yes. Yeah. Coach Coke Matthews. He is a legend at Henderson State. Very, very, very long-term swim coach. The number of people's lives that he impacted as the coach there at Henderson is just, beyond count.
Mm-hmm.
Such a good man, such a good influence on all of his swimmers. I think his decision to let me come there had such, again, an impact on my life, because I met my wife there.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be married to the person that I'm married to, would not have the children that I have, if it wasn't for his decision to let somebody with no competitive swim experience at all. Like I said, I had swam recreationally most of my life, but had absolutely no competitive swim experience when I got there to that team. And that decision that he made to let me come just tells you about his heart and the things that he does to let people do things like that and to try to improve their lives. And it's just beyond measure. And when he passed recently, it was just devastating news to everybody that knew him. It was devastating for the institution, for all of the swimmers that had ever been on the swim team while he was there.
Yeah, I just found, story after story after story, the outpouring of love from people, and there's so many stories like yours in terms of what he did to impact the lives of people, and ultimately that's a lot of what it's all about. His legacy lives on.
It does, and it just the stories that people will have and that sort of thing. Because I remember he started doing triathlons actually also, because after I finished my career there, I did eventually get back to doing triathlons, and he and I did quite a few together. And it's so funny, because one of the big things that I remember about he and I doing triathlons together is such different styles. I've got that military background, so I like that structure and that order. And I would be at a race, and I would be there an hour and a half to 2 hours prior to start time, so that I could get there, kind of scout out the course, find out, okay, when I come out of the swim, where do I need to go to get to my bike? And I'd kind of walk it, get my bike situated somewhere that I knew, okay, this is going to be easy for me to find. I'm not going to have to be searching around for my bikes. Had all my stuff laid out, all that stuff well ahead of time. And then here'd come Coke in 20 minutes or something before start time, throwing his bike up on the rack and just kind of putting his stuff out. And it's just like, such vastly different styles, but,
right.
He was so good. Of course he had a swim background. He had swam in college as well, but he just was a great all around athlete. He was probably close to 20 years older than I was. And it was, he routinely would finish better than I did. And so despite those differing styles, he always had good race results. And it was always a good time to go to races with him and to be able to hang out and talk with him after a race and that sort of thing. So it really was. It was just such a loss, and he leaves behind his family and everything. And just there's a day doesn't go by that I don't think about them and pray for them that things will go well for them.
So a triathlon, I'm not even going to attempt. What is the order? I know it's running.
It is a swim,
running, cycling, and swimming, right?
Correct. And the order is swim, then the bike, and the run is last.
Okay. Yeah. That's an impressive event.
And the swim and the bike were always my two strongest events. The weakest of them was always the run. Mm-hmm. And I would really hope that they would actually do one in reverse order with the swim last, so that I could, because again, that was my strongest event. And so I thought, if we would do one of these in reverse order and get some of these people that are crazy fast runners, get them good and tired before they got in the water, then I'd stand even a better chance of doing it. But I think there's a lot of concern with people being that tired and then putting them in the water.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's like a couple mile swim.
Well, the length of them varies.
Okay.
You have anything from a sprint distance triathlon, which might be a 350 to a 500-yard swim, 12 to 15, maybe 18-mile bike, and then usually a 3 to 4 mile run is a fairly typical range for a sprint distance. And then you've got everything from there. You've got what's called international distance, which is a 1,500 meters, so right at a 1 mile swim, a 40-kilometer bike followed by a 10-kilometer run, and then half Ironman, 1.2 mile swim, 56-mile bike, 13.1 mile run, up to full Ironman, which is 2.4 mile swim, 112 on the bike, and then a marathon. And then there are even longer distance races than that for people that are glutton for punishment.
Right. Yeah, that is impressive. That's impressive. I actually saw an interview a couple months ago. There's a lady that does, I think the term they use is ultra marathons, where she might run 100 miles. I mean, something just ridiculous.
Yeah. And that not my thing, my thing. I do enjoy running and still bike quite a bit and stuff. And in fact, my 51st birthday, not too terribly long ago, I had dedicated myself and made a goal that I was going to do a 51-mile bike ride for my 51st birthday and got that in. And not a bad ride, but when you're talking between 3 and 4 hours, that's just a good chunk out of your day. That there's a lot of other things that can fill that time. So it's hard to do that much training.
Okay. So you finish up at Henderson. Where to next?
After Henderson, graduated, I went to work at Arkansas Children's Hospital, working on the hematology oncology unit. So was taking care of kids with cancers, bone marrow transplants, sickle cell patients, hemophilia. So basically anything kind of related to blood disorders. Okay. We do some of the solid tumors, bone tumors with the cancer aspect of it, but a lot of what we took care of were blood disorders, blood cancers, like I said, hemophilia, sickle cell disease, that sort of thing. And really, really loved that job. That's it. Such a wonderful job because those kids, it's a lot different atmosphere actually. Because those kids, number one, they are so resilient for the most part. And a lot of the times they're not necessarily there because they're sick. It's not like some of your other units where you've got kids that are there because they have some sort of an illness, pneumonia or something like that. A lot of times those kids are there for their treatments, and some of the treatment protocols, depending on their disease process, really, at least during the treatment, weren't as bad. You think about chemotherapy and cancer treatment, and you think about a lot of nausea and vomiting and things like that. But a lot of the treatments for the kids weren't too terribly bad. And so those kids, when they were there, a lot of times they were well, other than having cancer, of course. Mm-hmm. And so, those kids would be tearing up and down the halls on tricycles. They'd be having silly string fights and all that sort of stuff when they were in. So it was really, really a great field. It takes a special person to work peds hemonc. I will tell you that because you do deal with your fair share of loss and bad outcomes when you do it. And you tend to lose focus on the kids that are cured and go on to do well because they finish up treatment and then they go on with their lives and you don't tend to see them as much. And so they don't tend to stick with you as much as the kids that don't have good outcomes. So it does take a really, really different personality to do that job, but I absolutely loved it and it was wonderful. And I decided kind of while I was working there that I wanted to go back to nurse practitioner school. I'd kind of always had that as a goal. Mm-hmm. And so I did start that, and working 3/12s a week. And then I had an opportunity to go to working weekends. So I'd work 2 12-hour shifts on the weekend. So you had most of the week. So I really had a pretty good schedule to be able to go back to school. So went back, got my master's degree, certification as a pediatric nurse practitioner. While I was in school, I had an opportunity to teach at a diploma nursing program. And so while I was finishing up my master's degree, and I'd always had an interest in teaching, and so I thought that was a good way to combine a couple of my interests, nursing and teaching. Mm-hmm. And so moved over and made that move and started teaching, and for the most part have done that ever since. I did have a year that I worked at a primary care clinic as a nurse practitioner, and just, worked there, and being in that environment wasn't necessarily the thing that I really liked. And so I had an opportunity to go back to teaching, and have been doing that ever since. That's been just over 16 years ago that I started where I currently teach, and am really loving it and enjoying doing what I do.
Well, we were just talking about somebody that, opened up a path that changed your life for better and for always, right? Which was your coach. And here you've done the same thing over the last 16 years, with countless students, in terms of guiding them down a path and maybe helping them make some decisions, rather, as it relates to the direction they wanted to go that they may not have otherwise made. And so let's talk about some of the success stories that you've had, because I know one of the great things is having somebody come back and talk to you about what they've done. So when we come back from this break, I want to really delve into that. Okay, so we're going to be right back with more Military Brat University after these messages. We've spoken about both his military career and his career in both the medical profession as a nurse practitioner and as a professor. And what I want to talk about is the indelible impact that a great teacher, professor, coach can have, and how that can be most rewarding for those of you in that position.
Yeah, that's really a great aspect of doing what I do. I have had the opportunity, I've been doing this, been teaching the combined total between the two institutions where I have taught right at 19 years. And so I've had the opportunity, actually, that I have taught a couple of mother-daughter pairs. Taught the mother while mother was in nursing school, and then subsequently have taught the daughter of that nurse at a later point in time. And that really makes you reflect on how old you are and how long you've been doing something when you see that happen. And have had the opportunity to teach several different people in a couple of different programs. In fact, I have a coworker who I had the privilege of teaching in both her diploma program and in her RN to BSN program. She now has a doctorate and is one of my coworkers, and a wonderful coworker. So it's been interesting to see the accomplishments that and things that students that I have worked with have done, not just with getting doctoral degrees, and quite a few of those, which obviously you're always proud to see those students of yours continue on and seek higher degrees, but just the nurses that a lot of my former students have become is so humbling. And especially the last year and a half with the COVID pandemic, because sometimes I have the feeling, because when I was in basic training, Desert Shield started while I was in the delayed entry program. And so we knew there was something going on. That buildup had started while I was in delayed entry. And then I remember being at basic training one night, whistle blowing for formation about 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. We all run downstairs formation. One of the drill sergeants is there is telling us, go upstairs, turn on the TV, see what's going on, when Desert Storm started. And so there's almost a feeling of, when you're teaching nursing students right now in the middle of this pandemic and knowing what they're facing, there are some parallels. I am not making, saying it's the exact same thing, obviously, but there are some parallels with that when you know what brand new nurses that you are training are going to go out there and face. And how proud I am of the nurses that I taught that graduated just over a year ago, that walked out of nursing school into that environment. And then the nurses, the students that just graduated a couple of months ago, many of them are going to work in COVID units and things. And the work that they do, I can't say enough about how proud I am of those nurses, how dedicated they are. Because it really is, it's a tough world out there right now. And I am so honored, and I'm humbled and honored to have had the opportunity to work with them, because it's not just a one-way street teaching, because I learn from my students all the time. I learn a lot of things from my students, and I will tell them when we start a new class, when I have interactions with them, I don't know all the answers. There are some things that I will teach you guys that I know much more about. There are going to be other things that I'm not as experienced with. And I ask them if you guys have experience, because we will have students with other degrees, previous degrees. I mean, it's not uncommon for us to have students that'll have a master's degree that is coming back to nursing school. They will have experience in other medical professions. And so I tell them, please share that experience with us, because we're here to learn together. And one of the greatest experiences is every nursing school I've ever seen will have what we call recognition or a pinning ceremony at the end of the program of study for those students. And that is just one of the best nights ever, because you're there, you get to see these students, they walk across that stage, they get their pin, they have reached that goal that they set for themselves. They have worked hard. The way our program that I currently teach in is set up, or what's called a 2+2 program. So they've got their 2 years of prerequisite courses, and then they come to us and they finish their 2 years of nursing school. And so they have worked hard for those 2 years to reach that goal that they set for themselves. Their families are there. They're so proud of them. And that is just one of the absolute best nights of the year, is that night that we get to do that recognition ceremony, that pinning ceremony for those graduates.
Well, if I may, I actually have a little bit of experience with a pinning ceremony. So not only did I get to witness my wife's pinning ceremony back in, I believe it was 2016, but I was fortunate enough for her to choose me to actually pin her. So, so I've seen it and participated, and it was a really, really cool night. And I'll probably put that picture up on Thursday as a throwback. So yeah, it's really cool. You made the analogy, and while all of us listening certainly appreciate the fact that you might not have been trying to draw them as equals, there are certainly parallels, right? And so, as a soldier in basic training, if there is a time of war or conflict, then that drill sergeant and his team are preparing you for the front lines, and same thing in nursing school. Right now there is, a pandemic, right? We won't call it a war or conflict, but there's a pandemic. And so you are training those soldiers, if you will, for the front lines. So to my way of thinking, that's a perfect parallel you drew between the two, with no disrespect to one or the other.
No, none at all. And like I said, not to minimize, obviously, because again, I was infantry, and that was, our job was to be on the pointy end of the stick when things happen. But never to underestimate what the nurses are doing, the things that they are going through. And like I said, especially brand new nurses. I mean, you think for somebody to graduate from nursing school, and it's a hard enough job to go into, because I remember graduating with my BSN and starting to work. It takes a good 6 months to a year for most nurses to feel really comfortable, really confident in what they do in normal circumstances. And then you throw a pandemic on top of that, when you got all of the additional personal protective equipment that these nurses are having to wear and the extended times that they're having to wear it, it just makes that job so much more difficult. And again, I worked pediatric oncology, so I dealt with a fair share of bad outcomes with kids. But I know nurses that have been in the field for a year to 18 months, and they have dealt with more death in that year to 18 months that they have been a nurse than I dealt with in the 3 years that I did peds oncology. And many of them have seen more bad outcomes than some nurses will see their entire careers. And so it is a tough job right now. And again, I am honored and humbled to work with the students that I work with, because they are great nurses. It just, I can't describe how proud I am of them and how humbled and honored I am to have had the opportunity to work with them, seeing the difference that they're making in the work that they do.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, I've gained more respect over the past several years for nursing than I ever have, because I have, at least an adjacent view, not a bird's eye view, but I'm nurse adjacent, right? I'm seeing and hearing about firsthand, what that job takes. Even down to, at the height of last year when Andrea was working in a COVID unit, pulling into the driveway, letting the garage door up, coming in, dropping her stuff in the washer, and then heading straight into the room, into the shower before hello, and it's it's nothing to be taken lightly, nothing at all.
No, it's not. No.
Yeah.
And it's, and I've got to say, just maybe a little off topic, but kind of a personal note. It's just been so interesting getting to watch your wife, seeing some of those things. Is such a small world. It's like, you and I, again, friends for years and years and years. And then your wife and I have the same profession. It's really neat to see some of those things and some of those connections that are out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, you guys have your own thing, separate from you and I, you guys have your own thing because of that, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Which is, and I kind of want to talk about, some other parallels within our lives when we come back. We're about to take one last break, you guys, and we'll be right back with more Military Brat University with Dr. Fermin Renteria. And welcome back to Military Brat University. We've been spending this evening with a dear, dear friend of mine, Fermin Renteria. And we've kind of run the gamut. We went through both his high school, college, and military career. We've talked about, and actually it's something I didn't know about, the triathlons, which is beyond amazing to me. And we've talked about how, even though he and I have a friendship that spans 3+ decades, he and my wife have a separate friendship because of the commonality of both being in the nursing profession. And, what would have been really cool, Fermin, is if you could have, made your way, around and having spent some time around my dad after your Army career, because you guys would have had a conversation that would have totally shut me out. So, and I think about that a lot of the time because, of course, at the time that you and I knew each other, we were 14, 15 years old. I didn't really, obviously, Army is something that kind of people think about, kids play Army and that sort of thing. And is always something that you think about, or at least I know that I did as a kid. But your father's career at that point in time, I didn't realize those things. And honestly, there is regret on my part that I wish I had more familiarity with that and understood those things. And when you and I knew each other and I would have had the opportunity to talk to your father, to hear some of his stories and some of those things, that really truly is a regret of mine, because by the time I obviously got old enough to appreciate those experiences and to really recognize the accomplishments that your father had in his military career, was not at a time that I had the opportunity to speak with him. And I so regret that I didn't know that. And when I could have come to your house anytime that I wanted to, and just been able to soak up those stories and things. But of course, at that point in time, I didn't have my own background. And so wouldn't have been able to talk about some of the stories and jumping and having a leg strap in the wrong spot when you're coming down and some of those kind of things, that would have been a conversation to have after I had my service as well. Yeah. And oddly enough, I didn't know what most of that meant as a kid either. It's just my dad, he told me, I heard a lot of great stories. Tons of great stories over the years. And, only now, do I recall some of them or appreciate or understand, some of the stories and, some of what had to be dealt with. as a soldier back then, So, yeah, and I think that's part and parcel to the motivation for doing the show. Is to hear those stories.
Yeah.
So, right now, I'm circling back to the beginning, right? Which is the excitement of you and I connecting live, no texting, no messages, no tagging me in a post that has some grammatical error in it so that we can both chuckle, just reveling in the fact that I'm on here with my friend. And I'm not comfortable telling a peer that I'm proud of them. What I will say is that at many a turn, I've talked about your accomplishments, to people that may want to hear them, to people that may not want to hear them, but I talk about them. And that's as close as I'll come to saying I'm quote unquote proud of a peer. I just feel like you're supposed to tell somebody subordinate to you that you're proud of them, right? Like a child. But I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I'm proud of what you're accomplishing because it's still ongoing. And, Godspeed, really, you're making it happen.
Well, yeah. And I appreciate that. That means a lot to me, my friend, because I feel the same way about you. And, to see the things that you've accomplished, not only in career, but more importantly, as a husband, as a father, and as a grandfather, because ultimately that is where we have our biggest impact on your children. You see the memes on Facebook all the time. Your job, your employer will have your job posted. If you were to die, they'd have your job posted before your funeral.
Absolutely.
So they're going to forget you, but your children will never forget you having been there. Your grandchildren will never have forgotten that you were there. And so, like I said, I feel the same way about you. And I see the legacy of your father carried on with you. The great things that your father accomplished carried on in you, and you carrying those lessons over to your kids and to your grandkids. So the respect is mutual, my friend. And so, again, the things that you continue to do.
And here's a quote you mentioned, and I mean, nothing could ring truer, right? That then your employer would have your job posted, before you're in the ground. And kind of a personal thing here, I eulogized my dad because I wouldn't have anybody else do it. And the final quote that I gave during that eulogy is that parenting is the only job where success is achieved by making your position obsolete. And that was, I had to say that to reconcile the fact that he was gone, and at that time I was 48 years old, and hey, he'd done all that he could, and he'd made his job obsolete, and therefore it was time for me to go on. And anything beyond that was pure selfishness, and still is to this day. There are a couple musicians I still haven't listened to, and we're closing in on 3 years later. I won't listen to those songs. I'm not quite ready for it yet. But we go on.
We do, so, and that's a great quote. I like that.
Yeah. So, Fermin, we have a segment on the show called Sound Off, which is, as the name implies, which has the military connotation. And today's Sound Off is kind of a shout out to the fact that I didn't know about your participation in triathlons. And to some extent, that could be considered a hidden talent or an unknown talent that, of which I was unaware. So we're about to start the Sound Off segment. And today's Sound Off question will be, what unknown or hidden talents do you have? And that's to the listening and viewing public out there. We're about to start the Sound Off, I believe, right now.
Hip, hop, hip, hop, hip, hop, hip, hop. The heads are up, the chests are out, the arms are swinging in cadence count. Sound off, sound off, sound off, sound off. Cadence count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so everybody, please sound off below. What hidden talents, skills, or activities would you like to share with us? Our special guest tonight, Fermin Renteria, participates in triathlons. I'll share one of mine. I wrote a cookbook several years ago, and down below I'm going to ask that you please share one of your hidden talents, skills, or activities that you participate in. And again, Fermin, I want to thank you sincerely for coming onto the show tonight and spending some time with us. I have the number. I will now use it. And thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. It was so good to catch up with you. I'm honored and humbled to have been a part of the show tonight. It's been a great, great experience.
All righty. Good night, everybody.